This is the multi-voice text-to-speech podfic reading of The Giver by Anonymous, composed by Burning Aurora, Kaliana, and Flowerhawk. Chapter 1. There was a tinkling clatter as Remus walked into his room, and he cursed softly as he realized he'd tripped over a little cairn of meticulously placed glass jars in the entry to the bedroom, tutting as he carefully placed them back into a tower so that Sirius wouldn't know they had been amiss when he came home from wherever he'd gone. He'd apparently left in a strop about 30 minutes ago, huffing past Hope as she'd sat at the table, grumbling that he needed a walk before stomping out the house without so much as a jacket against the chill. As for himself, Remus hadn't seen Sirius since earlier that morning when he'd left him, cock-drunk and sated, in bed, to go do his morning chores, successfully put off from his desperate attempts to get Remus to bite him as his heat grew ever nearer, or so he'd thought at the time. He should have known better, really. Sirius had never been one to let anything go easily, least of all something to do with Remus. He'd got Remus to knot him through his first heat with his singular brand of determination and perfect button nose, so it stood to reason he'd be the same with this when this started to come up. Remus had returned to the house just now following his morning chores to find his mother chuckling quietly to herself at the kitchen table, sipping her tea and reading, and no Sirius where he expected to find him, building his nest for his incoming heat, and generally making their room smell incredible. It irked Remus. He had no doubt that Sirius would return, and Remus had personally never required him to ask any kind of permission for him to go out or do anything. But it was chilly, and no one was warmer than Sirius on the verge of his heat. He wanted a cuddle and a sniff, and Sirius wasn't around to scent him with his buttery sweetness and soft skin so ripe for marking at this point in his cycle. He felt a pang when he thought again of the reason Sirius had gone out in a huff. Remus still hadn't claimed him, biologically that is. Sirius was his in every way another person could be, and Remus felt just as tied to him in return, but he'd been avoiding the final permanent bond. It felt wrong, or rather, like it was a degree of permanent intimacy that he didn't want to force on Sirius when they were still so new. When it was done, no matter how badly Sirius wanted to leave, the mark would prevent him lest he wither away and die of the drop. It would hurt Remus if Sirius were to leave unclaimed, but he'd never force an alternative onto him, especially so early in their relationship and after such a contentious start. Remus still felt guilty some days. He felt like he'd won the lottery by knowing the winning numbers before the draw, like he'd tricked Sirius into their life together, or at least he'd folded extremely easily when Sirius had begged him so sweetly when he should have had more resolve. He still, in his heart, worried that Sirius hadn't known what he was in for when he'd pleaded for Remus to knot him during his first heat. He'd been out of his mind, after all, with lust and hormones and the grief of having to flee his parents. They had a good thing going and Remus couldn't, even if he tried, regret keeping Sirius. But sometimes he worried that Sirius would wake up one day and realize he deserved so much more than the first alpha that showed him a modicum of basic human kindness. He stared down at the stack of jars, painstakingly collected after they had finished the jam inside and hoarded, and looked around the rest of the room at the developing nest. Sirius was still getting the hang of it, evidently. He noted the ever-growing collection of throws and pillows on the bed, filched from the rest of the house, as well as the pile of Remus's used socks.
"I like the way your sweat smells, Moons. Don't judge me,"
he could see poking out from under Sirius's pillow. There were some normal, to his mind, additions. Carefully laid out candles around photos of them both from their first few months of being together, Remus's clothes folded into little piles around the bed and the blanket they had first fucked on, complete with stray bits of straw spread over the bed. But there were also things that were so uniquely Sirius that they both amused and perplexed him. Books he'd read over the last 3 months with an expression of wonder and pink-cheeked delight placed around the bed, chocolate wrappers kept after Remus had bought them to share, and several bouquets of dried wild flowers, also once a gift from Remus, placed carefully around the room as if they were still blooming and beautiful, rather than dry, dusty, and a little funny-smelling. It was all the evidence of Sirius in his life, from the thrifted second-hand clothing falling haphazardly out of the washing basket to the sheets they shared and their favorite snacks. But crucially, no Sirius himself. And Remus had known in a sort of abstract way, and once he'd met Sirius, in very concrete terms, what having an Omega partner would mean for him in a biological sense. He was a farmer. He knew more about the mechanics of hormones and cycles of heat than most people discovered in their whole lifetimes, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of the situation. Where it felt like a bit of his heart was missing as long as Sirius was out of his sight, where he craved his scent, and the combination of their scents in particular, sometimes more than he craved food or water. The way his skin felt itchy and his scalp would prickle uncomfortably the longer Sirius was away, and the palpable relief he felt when they were reunited. He had known from the moment he had seen Sirius, curled up in the hay in the back of his truck in nothing but a ratty band t-shirt, that he would love him for as long as he'd live, but nothing could have prepared him for the severity of it, the desperation, to be with him, scent him, fill his lungs with the uniqueness that was Sirius, and fill him up until he was round with Remus's babies. And sometimes he sensed it was the same for Sirius. Sirius, for all his spunk and dramatics and outright ignorance of the world, still looked at Remus like he was his guiding light and port in a storm. And in many ways he supposed he was, and that was maybe the problem. This was only the second heat Sirius will have had in his life. He'd only been free of his terrible circumstances for a grand total of 180 days, give or take. Of course, he thought Remus was incredible. Remus had learned quickly that anything, any basic kindness, he showed Sirius would earn him a cuddly, desperate-to-please Omega, convinced that Remus was some kind of god rather than just a man who was doing the bare, human minimum. That was why he hadn't claimed him yet. That was why he was taking his time, letting Sirius acclimatize to what normal humanity felt like, what it felt like to be more than just a vessel for babies, to be a person, not property. And if that meant eventually losing him when Sirius woke up one day and realized there was more to life than the Lupin farm, then he told himself he could be content to have helped him get to that point. He'd never forget the first month after that first fateful heat, when it became clear that their lack of care in nodding without protection hadn't resulted in a pregnancy. Sirius had been inconsolable and confused, since he wasn't even sure he wanted kids at the time, and to Remus's horror, positively terrified of the alpha he now lived with. Eventually, after some gentle coaxing and lots of cuddles and a day outside making love gently under the ripening apple tree, Remus had managed to get those thoughts straight, that he wasn't disappointed in Sirius or angry that he hadn't fallen pregnant, that he'd have a place at the farm for as long as he wanted, regardless of whether or not he ever wanted children. The second heat had been better. After that one, they'd finally decided, together, that they didn't need to decide about kids just yet. Remus wanted kids, sure, but he wanted Sirius more. He would defer to Sirius over whether he wanted to carry their children, and Sirius would allow himself to think about it and decide how he felt later without the pressure of family expectation or society dictating what the done thing was. That had been 2 months ago now, and Sirius had started asking for the mating bite just a few weeks later. It seemed that regardless of the promises Remus made to him, Sirius still needed proof of Remus's word. It hurt. Not that Sirius didn't fully trust him. That was the only part of this that made any sense at all. But that Sirius thought Remus would need a bond or any kind of incentive to want to keep him around in the first place. He was trying to engineer his safety in the only way he'd been taught to expect it, through the controlling force of the claim. And it wasn't that Remus didn't want it. Every glimpse of Sirius's unmarked neck, the smell of him, sweet and lovely, the feel of him in Remus's arms was a billboard, a siren call even, to Remus begging him to make him his, permanently. He'd never been one to disregard his instincts out of some misplaced impulse to pretend he didn't have them, but in this case, his caution had more to do with making sure that Sirius didn't take the bond out of fear. He'd be damned if he gave Sirius a reason to fear him in this life, ever. Sirius worried his thumb over the grooves in the wooden bar, letting his foul mood make him scowl and purse his lips in a way that would usually make Remus smirk and kiss the mood out of him. The thought of Remus, beautiful, kind, golden Remus, probably obliviously doing attractive, farmy things while Sirius brooded, sent a wave of longing through him at the same time as his stomach clenched painfully. Stupid preheat. He knew it was a risk to be out and about in his state. It didn't matter that he was somewhere safe. He knew his heat was imminent, and when it started, he needed to be near Remus. But he couldn't quite help his impulse to buck the alpha's radius sometimes. to push him into worrying until he was more likely to bend and claim Sirius out of pure desire to know where he was at a given moment. And then he felt guilty. It felt manipulative to try and coax Remus to claim him if he didn't want to. But then, Omegas on the cusp of heat were seldom expected to be reasonable, so he gave himself that much license just this once. There was no influencing Remus at any rate. His hand rubbed harshly at his unblemished neck, bitter and with the fraying of hurt around the edges. It was itchy. He was itchy all over, irritable and grumpy and too warm under the jumper. Hope had blackmailed him into wearing before she consented to letting him leave the house. A twinkle in her eye that was so like Remus's, it made him lightheaded. God, he wanted Remus.
Boy trouble.
The bartender's dry voice came. He looked up at the beautiful red head leaning across from him with a knowing grin. He scowled.
It's not fair. He tells you everything.
She chuckled and passed him a cherry cola and rum. He grunted his thanks.
I am his best friend.
She smirked.
And he doesn't tell me your news. He tells me his. So I know that your heat is around the corner because he said he'd be out of touch for a week. And I know that he's still worried he's taking advantage of you. And your sour expression just now tells me that his caution is causing trouble in the ranks. It's not brain surgery to put the rest together.
Sirius winced.
Not trouble exactly.
He sighed. He didn't want to share his and Remus's business either. He felt surprisingly territorial over it, truly.
I'm just trying to get him to see that I'm fine. Sure, I have a fucked up family and I'm working through all that, but I'm not going anywhere, unless he wants me to and is too scared to say.
A finger and thumb gripped Sirius's chin and turned him to face her stern expression. He couldn't help but register the alpha pheromones wafting from her, heady rose damask and merlot grapes. He swallowed the urge to pull away in fright as his inner Omega registered that this wasn't the alpha he wanted, but Lily would never take advantage of him in the state he was in. He was safe with her, so he stayed put.
Listen to me,
she said not ungently, green eyes boring into his.
Remus Lupin isn't scared or a pushover. He may have a soft spot for lost boys and flightless birds, but you're neither of those things. You're a man he had the privilege of helping when you were in a tough spot. Someone he views as an equal. He would never humour you by letting you stay. You've never had occasion to see him stand his ground. But I'm here to tell you that if he didn't want you around, you'd know.
Then why can't he show the same assertiveness in showing me he does?
Sirius pleaded. She looked thoughtful at that and let his chin go with a light pat to his cheek.
He hasn't told me much about your situation before you met, but he's let slip enough for me to gather that they were old-fashioned right. Your family, pretty conservative.
Sirius could only nod. It was an understatement, but he didn't want to get into the details right then. She mirrored him.
Maybe he wants to be sure that you always have the choice then. Maybe it's not that he thinks you don't know your own mind, but he's more concerned that you have the ability to change it later.
That gave him pause. How could he assure Remus that he wanted no other future than the one he saw with him on the farm? Not just because of the freedoms he knew it would give him, but because he wanted Remus. Because he loved him. But that was the sticking point then, wasn't it? Because he hadn't told Remus that yet. Not for want of opportunity, but rather out of an anxiety that Remus didn't feel the same. That was why he wanted the bite, which, damn it. So maybe there was some truth to Remus worrying that Sirius needed the bite to feel wanted, that he wanted the security. Especially if Remus didn't fully grasp that the desire to remain with him was mostly born of love. That truth of his own ability to communicate grated too, and his stomach clenched painfully as his heart twisted. There was a tinkling as the door opening triggered the bell hung above it, and two heavy sets of footsteps entered, setting Sirius further on edge when he recognized neither as Remus by their smells. Lily looked over Sirius's head and smiled, though her expression was strange.
What can I get you two, gentlemen?
A beer.
A vaguely familiar voice came cheerily.
And
Sirius.
Sirius turned so quickly it nearly caused him to overbalance.
Regulus.
Sirius.
Sirius barely had a moment to come to terms with the fact that his brother, who he hadn't seen in months, was standing before him in the sleepy little town he'd escaped to when Regulus was on him in a moment, engulfing him in his arms, and now familiar scent.
Oh my God, I can't believe we found you.
Sirius asked weakly as Regulus pulled away, revealing his companion. Sirius dragged his gaze away from the broad but skinny frame of his brother, who otherwise looked so like himself, albeit in a rumpled black suit and dress shoes, to a tall man with messy black hair and glasses at his side. He was dressed comically casually in comparison to Regulus's formality, and the contrast was striking. At first, he was nonplussed by this apparent stranger, until realization dawned when he met his eyes, brown and warm like summertime in childhood.
James.
Sirius gasped in recognition. James smiled that sweet, boyish smile that Sirius remembered from when they were children, but he didn't come any closer. Sirius was momentarily confused until he heard Lily coughing suddenly behind the bar.
Sirius,
She spluttered when he looked at her in question.
you're in.
Heat.
Regulus breathed. James nodded, nostrils flaring and actively keeping his distance. Sirius took another look at him, taking in the height and breadth of him, the musky scent that wafted to him, paprika and wood smoke, an alpha holding himself back resolutely. Then he took stock of himself, frowning. It took him a second to feel the roiling tremors racking his system, the cramping and gnawing in his belly, and the itching under his skin as he grew clammy and sweaty. But when he did, he groaned as his belly clenched painfully, sending a flood of slick down his inner thighs and soaking his jeans. He regretted his strop from the farm just now. As much as he was happy to see his brother, he wanted Remus close even more. He looked at Lily pleadingly. She was also holding herself back carefully. He remembered with a start that she was an alpha too, and that he was, in fact, surrounded by alphas at this moment. Well, 2 alphas and 1 unpresented, soon to be probably alpha. He felt a flicker of fear until he remembered where he was.
I'll call him.
Lily said, as if to reinforce his thought, turning to the phone she kept behind the bar and dialing quickly. He sighed in relief, sagging against the bar for support. He jumped when Regulus cleared his throat.
And who's he?
Regulus gave darkly. Sirius frowned, trying to keep up when the presiding thought in his brain was,
Remus. Remus.
Sirius said, narrowly avoiding the impulse to whine the name and turning back to his brother.
He's been helping me.
You've shacked up with a stranger.
Regulus was suddenly scenting him, brushing Sirius's hair back to look at his neck. Sirius flinched back, narrowly avoiding the urge to bare his teeth.
He's not a stranger.
Sirius rushed to explain, indignant.
He's my...
Regulus interrupted, still closely scrutinizing Sirius's appearance. He didn't appear impressed.
He hasn't claimed you. Have you let him not you?
Regulus was crowding Sirius against the bar now, using his height and his frantic energy to intimidate Sirius. He was scenting Sirius, his expression manic, until he was yanked back.
Hey, I'm not sure that's necessary, man.
This was James, looking sternly at Regulus, who he had by the collar. Regulus was still looking wild with distress and something like possessiveness. It reminded Sirius of his mother, and he couldn't help but bristle at the indignity of being treated like property.
What the fuck is this, Reg?
He asked, finding his backbone under the confusion and the tremors and the yearning for his alpha.
You thought you'd come and find me and I'd be, what, cowering under a bin?
Well, I certainly didn't think you'd be so common as to play the whore for the first alpha to get you slicked up and begging.
The air was split with a ringing crack as Sirius slapped him. Remus was back to his chores, pitching hay into the horse stalls for the comforting monotony of the task, when he heard the telltale sounds of his mother panting as she hurried to the barn. Her scent, usually calm, the smell of sweet tea and lavender, was anxious with a burned edge of worry, and he straightened in anticipation for her approach, leaning on his pitchfork for a few moments until she appeared.
Everything okay?
He asked when she arrived, flushed and pinching her side as if in a stitch.
I think so, although...
She stopped to gulp in some air.
Lily called. Apparently Sirius is at the bar.
Remus nodded, waiting for her to finish.
His heat began. Apparently some alphas are there too.
Remus was striding out of the barn before she could even finish her sentence. She held out his keys as he passed her, and he took them automatically. He didn't bother going in to change. He didn't even pick up a jacket. He didn't need it. The possessive fever rippling under his skin felt like lava as he went straight to his red pickup truck and swung himself up and into the driver's seat. The engine roaring to life when he jammed the keys into the ignition and turned, and his vision narrowed down to a single point, the pathway from where he was to where he needed to be, where Sirius was, where Sirius needed him. It took a second, but after the shock of the slap, everyone erupted into action. Lily came around the bar to console Sirius, murmuring that Remus would be there soon and offering her ample embrace for comfort, letting him slump back into her arms and shiver uncontrollably. James stood between Sirius and Reg now, babbling something about violence being unnecessary and
insults just being plain provocative, Reg.
But Reg just stood frozen, staring at Sirius over James's shoulder as if he barely knew him. Sirius glared back, defiant. Somewhere in the back of Sirius's mind, he knew it had been wrong to slap him. He knew it was a perpetuation of the violence visited on both of them since they were children. But he knew Reg was in the wrong too, allowing his judgment of Sirius's choices and superior position in the hierarchy of biology in their family blind him to Sirius's agency in deciding to accept Remus's help and stay with him ever since. He was trying to control Sirius, same as everybody else had, and he wasn't about to take it lying down. But the larger part of him, the one currently being dictated to by the influx of heat hormones, was fiercely protective of the little life he'd been making for himself, of the farm and the little town, of hope, and especially of Remus. How dare Regulus reduce all that to whoring, to something cheap and meaningless, survival rather than love that Sirius chose to stay for every day? How dare he write all of that off without a second thought? The thought of Remus, kind, gentle, wonderful Remus, who thought of him like a person, who talked to him like he mattered, who asked his opinion and took him out for dates every Friday in their little town and picked him flowers when he was outside on the farm. The thought of him had him gushing slick like an open tap. He dimly registered the way the alphas around him seemed to falter for a second, flaring their nostrils and tensing, but he was focused on his little brother and the unsure expression on his face. He was so focused that he missed the sound of a vehicle parking with a screech outside the bar and the tinkle above the door as it was opened without ceremony.
Sirius,
James began.
can I help you get where you need to be?
James's no doubt thoughtful and chivalrous offer was interrupted by Lily employing her own brand of possessiveness over Sirius as Remus's friend.
Take your hands off him, you're not his alpha.
Neither are you.
Nope, I am.
The voice didn't wait to be accommodated, and yet it ran through Sirius's whole being like the tolling of a bell, and before he knew it, he was being released by Lily and transferred to a familiar, lean side, with an arm wrapped around him that felt like home.
Remus,
He whined in relief, burying his head into the curve of the alpha's neck, scenting him openly, panting into his skin to take in mouthfuls of it. He smelled like he'd been working outside, like sweat and hay and goodness, and Sirius's mouth was watering.
It's okay, love.
Remus shushed, exposing his neck so that Sirius could take the comfort he needed, only shivering slightly when Sirius licked unabashedly over his scent gland.
It is not okay.
Regulus started, snapping out of his stupor suddenly with a poor attempt at his own alpha voice, though premature.
He needs to be somewhere safe, not with the likes of.
But then Remus's arm was tight around Sirius's waist, and his scent turned smoky, like a brush fire in the dry season of the farm, as he rounded on him with an expression that brooked no argument.
What is not okay?
He said, politely but unmistakably assertive.
Are you talking about Sirius as if he's not here?
He's my brother.
Remus snorted, unbothered but resolute.
I gathered as much.
He gave Reg a once-over and spared James a suspicious look.
But I'm his alpha, and I'll thank you to keep your hands off him.
Sirius's heart soared at those words, and he sagged against Remus further.
Mooney, Remus,
He begged, earning him a kiss to the crown of his head.
Come on, let's get you home, baby.
We're not done here.
Reg choked out indignantly as Remus scooped Sirius up like a bride in his arms, letting him scent and kiss as much as he liked as he strode out the bar, door tinkling once again as he nudged it open with his foot.
Well, by all means, follow me.
Remus called, rolling his eyes and pausing in the doorway.
We can talk more after your brother's had a knot.
They left before they could hear the profanity spilling from Regulus's mouth at his apparent audacity.
Mooney, my lovely Mooney.
Sirius was leaning against Remus's shoulder on the front bench seat of the truck as they drove, seemingly unshaken by the little scene inside the pub. But then Remus darted a look down to Sirius's tented jeans, wet with slick, and knew that the time for Sirius's ability to cognate logically had passed and wouldn't return until the heat ran its course. The heat which, as Sirius's pawing fingers and wet little tongue against his hammering pulse were illustrating, was very much only just ramping up and into gear. Alerted to this, he broke out of his brooding thoughts to change the gear up and to press the accelerator further, desperate to get home as soon as he could. He was breathing as shallowly as he could, the haze of Sirius's scent making him sweat with want, and itch to bend his little Omega over the hood of the car and nod him out in the open, regardless of who was watching. His heart, which had been beating a mile a minute since he'd begun to walk in the direction of his truck a little while before, had only slowed marginally since. It had spiked when he had smelled the other alphas and Sirius's heat and fear pheromones in the bar, and then settled slightly with Sirius at his side, only to spike again when his body caught up with his brain, and the effect of the needy, heady scent of Sirius had branded itself into his scent receptors. His mouth was in a near constant state of watering, and his skin crawled with the desperation to touch Sirius everywhere he could, remembering what it was to have him like this before, ripe and juicy, all heat and gasps and moaning as Remus took him apart. It didn't help that Sirius seemed to want that too, badly.
Baby?
Remus cautioned, trying to restrain the growl crawling up his throat as Sirius's fingers ghosted over his own now prominent bulge to rest on his waistband temptingly.
My Mooney,
Sirius said, a delicious possessiveness coloring his needy, desperate tone that Remus found immensely pleasing, even more pleasing than the flood of happy Omega scent that had accompanied Remus's arrival at his side just a few moments before.
My lovely Omega,
Remus asked in response, relenting enough for Sirius to worm under his arm and nuzzle closer. It was an added bonus that it kept the happy, buttery scent flowing freely, rather than the sour confusion that had lingered in the bar even as Remus carried Sirius out.
Yours?
Sirius asked, whining and panting as his hands wandered, actively pulling Remus's focus from the road. Still he nodded, pressing a kiss to the top of Sirius's head.
Mine.
He confirmed.
My Sirius.
Your Omega?
Sirius asked, his voice honey in sweetness. Remus groaned, fighting to keep his eyes fixed ahead. His brain was getting fuzzy, like it did before a rut, and he barely had the mental clarity to wonder if the panic to get to Sirius hadn't triggered it early when Sirius practically climbed into his lap.
Yes.
He finally gasped, turning off the main road and shifting down a gear in time to catch Sirius to him and expose his neck for him to scent with nibbles and licks. Sirius took Remus's earlobe between his teeth and bit down.
Prove it then,
he whispered, prompting in Remus a full-body shiver.
Show me I'm your Omega.
They were almost home now, the town's surroundings having faded away into the rolling fields of neighboring farms and the gradually thickening groves of trees. A little way off to the side, Remus remembered there was a little gap in the trees off the road, a perfect place for a little bit of privacy. And given that Sirius was now actively humping his leg just then, it was as good a spot as any to help him take the edge off. He pulled into the gap, holding on to the last vestiges of his control, with one hand on the wheel, and the other with his arm glued around Sirius until the vehicle came to a stop. As soon as he killed the engine, Sirius was making to straddle his lap, and Remus was rushing to accommodate him.
You want me to prove it?
Remus asked with a groan as Sirius's clever fingers fumbled with the buttons of Remus's shirt.
Need it, Mooney.
Sirius whined.
Need you to make me yours.
How do you need it, baby?
Remus asked, running his hands over the sweat-soaked vest under Sirius's jumper before shucking it off and throwing it into the footwell.
What do you need from me?
You're not?
Sirius sobbed, trembling as Remus's hands smoothed down over his back and over the swell of his lovely, plump arse.
Inside me, and
Remus asked, already knowing the answer. Sirius began to mouth over Remus's scent gland in illustration before the words even left his mouth.
Your mark.
He gasped, maybe a little nervously.
Please, Mooney. Remus. I want it. Pretty please.
Baby.
Remus tried to give patiently, but Sirius wouldn't be denied. He pulled away, his lower lip sticking out, and his scent turning sharp and indignant.
You don't want me?
He asked, eyes huge and lip trembling. Remus leaned in and kissed him. Sirius melted into it. He slumped forward to wrap his arms around Remus's neck, moaning when Remus's hand cupped the back of his head and his arm tightened around him. Remus kissed him deeply, licking into his mouth and searching for that taste which drove him crazy. When they broke apart, Sirius looked dazed, his eyes and scent softened slightly.
Of course I want you, silly.
Remus chuckled, grateful to see a smidge of the logical Sirius there still in those gray eyes. He traced Sirius's jaw with the back of his knuckles, marveling at his soft skin.
I always want you.
Then bite me, Remus.
Sirius pleaded, eyes earnest and brow adorably furrowed. There were beads of sweat trickling down his temple and desperate tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. Remus still hesitated.
We should talk about this properly when you're not in heat, baby.
He insisted, thumbing away a bead of moisture on Sirius's temple and pushing his hair behind his ear while he was at it.
You're not in.
I know what I want.
Sirius insisted, eyes blazing now as well as glazed.
Don't be like them,
he pleaded.
Don't make it out like I have no choice in this, or I can't know my own mind. I know I want your claim because I know I want you. If you don't feel the same, then...
Remus silenced him with another bruising kiss, and when he broke off, some of that fire was dimmed in Sirius's eyes, but he still looked hurt.
You think
Remus gave, manhandling the vest off Sirius's body and throwing it somewhere.
that if I didn't want you,
He started to fumble with the flies of Sirius's jeans until he caught on, hurrying to help Remus get them off his tacky legs and onto the floor.
that I'd be about to knot you in my truck?
Their fingers tangled as they both fought to get Remus's belt undone and his zip down enough to get his straining, throbbing cock out of his pants.
While your sodding brother and some other guy go to our home to wait for us.
Sirius huffed a disbelieving laugh that ended in a whimper when he got his hand around Remus's length, running a reverent hand over it as his mouth dropped open, desperate and dazed. Remus could feel the flood of slick through his own denims and groaned at the relief of Sirius's tight grip around him. Sirius raised up onto his knees at the same time as Remus took him by the waist and slipped a hand behind him to feel at the cleft of his arse. His fingers came away tacky.
You think I don't want you?
Sirius grunted as Remus slipped his thumb inside his hole.
Baby, you're everything I've ever dreamed of.
Sirius began to rock on Remus's hand, whining for more, and Remus softened his gruff tone to murmur into Sirius's neck.
Do you think I'd be having dreams about what's to come?
He gasped as Sirius squeezed his cock, using it as a handhold as he took Remus to the knuckle with his mouth slack and his eyes squeezed shut.
About a little cottage just for us?
He panted over Sirius's scent gland as he momentarily slipped his thumb out, only to replace it with his middle and forefinger, stretching out his slippery hole.
Full of dogs and laughter.
And babies who only know love.
Sirius finished for him, and when Remus looked, there were tears streaming down his lover's face. Overwhelmed, Remus closed his mouth over Sirius's gland again and sucked. Sirius exploded in orgasm, painting Remus's bare chest in white as he cried out a sob, collapsing with his face pressed to Remus's neck. Remus could do nothing more than hold him close as he rode it out.
Do you think that my favorite dreams would have you round with my babies, or playing with our kids, or growing old with me in a swing chair on the porch?
Remus whispered into his hair, stroking it back from his face.
If I didn't want you.
Sirius turned his face toward Remus, not getting up from his shoulder, his cheeks orgasm pink and his pupils blown as he smiled shyly.
You want all that with me?
He asked ever so sweetly. Remus smiled.
Well, I love you, baby, so how could I not?
Sirius whimpered, and his eyes fluttered shut as he clenched around Remus's fingers still buried inside him.
Remus, I need you inside me now.
Remus could only nod. Gently, he slipped his fingers out of Sirius and used the free hand to hoist him up, getting a knee under himself to lie him down on the bench seat. After a moment of calculation, he flipped a lever under the seat, which flattened the backrest too, giving him a wider space to work with and kneel between Sirius's bared, slick, glossed thighs. He leaned down into Sirius's reaching arms, pushing his jeans down far enough until he was bracketing Sirius's head with an arm as he lined himself up with his stretched-out entrance.
Ready, love?
He asked, already feeling his balls tightening up with anticipation as the head of his cock met the searing heat of his hole.
Fucking yes, Remus, just fuck me, please.
Sirius was sobbing now, but it cut off into a long keen as Remus slid inside.
Oh, fuck.
Remus choked out, overwhelmed by the tight heat sending licks of pleasure up his spine as he shuddered.
God, Mooney, you're so big.
Sirius gasped, clenching around him as he adjusted.
So full of you.
Not yet, you're not.
Remus gave, something in his brain flaring at the talk of children and keeping Sirius bread full. The interior of the car, windows steamed and dripping with condensation, and the dash to his left took on a reddish hue, and his sight narrowed in on the way Sirius was arching off the seat, exposing his neck, Adam's apple bobbing as he swallowed. Remus's hips began to move almost without his knowledge, and at once the pace was punishing. Sirius arched his body against Remus, and he slipped an arm under him to pull him closer, his alpha roaring when Sirius hooked his legs around Remus's waist, his feet drawing him closer as they hooked at his lower back. He was also crying out in a near-constant stream of Remus's name, breathy yeses and little punched-out ahs that Remus chased with every snap of his hips and his open mouth, a hair's breadth away from where he wanted the sweet taste of Sirius from the source.
Ah, Remus.
Sirius keened, nails raking down Remus's back so deeply he knew he'd have scars.
You're filling me so good. So fucking good. Love your cock. You're not.
As if on cue, Remus began to feel his swelling knot catching with every thrust. He sobbed as he picked up the pace, sweat trickling down his neck with the strain.
Fuck, Remus. Yes, so fucking good. I love you so much.
What?
Remus's mind went blank, and his thrusting rhythm was thrown off slightly as he tried to process what he swore Sirius had just said. He could have sworn that Sirius had just said.
I love you, Remus.
Sirius sobbed again.
I love you, fuck. Feels so good.
Well, there was no mistaking it that time. The surge of exaltation was so intense that his next attempt to withdraw was fully hampered as the knot stuck fast, and he came, suddenly and hard, and he thrust deeper, biting his own lip to stop himself from biting down on Sirius's neck, mind still reeling at Sirius's words. He dimly registered that Sirius was coming too, clinging to Remus like he was his tether to reality, and Remus let his spiraling thoughts go for a moment just to enjoy this. He collapsed on top of Sirius, who hummed contentedly, nuzzling into Remus's neck, as the heat finally and temporarily ebbed enough to have a moment of clarity and rest.
You didn't claim me,
Sirius said eventually. The truck was quiet. Remus had rolled them over so they could stay connected by his still inflated knot, but Sirius could breathe without Remus atop him. They lay on their sides on the bench seat facing each other, Remus watching as Sirius dozed. He blinked a little in surprise when Sirius spoke, and when Sirius opened his eyes, they were clear enough for a conversation.
I meant it when I said we should talk first,
he countered. Sirius nodded, but he still looked sad. Remus kissed his nose to try to console him, tightening his arm.
Did you mean what you said?
He asked, going on when Sirius's brow creased in confusion.
Just before you said?
He stammered, nerves strangling him into incoherency.
Never mind.
He ended on, feeling his cheeks heat before they were soothed with the cool skin of Sirius's palms cupping his face.
When I said I love you,
he asked shyly. Remus's eyes flew from Sirius's naked collarbone he'd been studying to avoid eye contact to meet Sirius's again. He nodded. Sirius blushed prettily.
Did you mean it?
He asked in return.
Before you knotted me, you said it too.
Of course I meant it.
Remus said in a whoosh.
Why would I?
Because I meant it, Remus.
Sirius said earnestly.
With everything I have, I love you, and your dreams and mine, they're the same.
Remus was speechless. Sirius leaned in and kissed him.
Can you accept, then,
he asked when he pulled away,
that even when I'm delirious with heat, that I know what I feel and want?
Remus considered that. He usually considered himself to be an alpha that saw other subgenders as equal to himself. He tried to treat everyone, regardless of their status, as human first, but it looked a little like he might need to do some work regarding how much he trusted Sirius's ability to know his mind when it was influenced by his hormones.
I thought you wanted the bite because you thought I needed an incentive to keep you,
he admitted.
I thought if I could show you that how I feel is unconditional, it would give you a chance to make up your mind. I didn't want to stop you from being able to change it later.
Sirius's expression softened.
You did show me, Mooney,
he said, a look in his eyes so deep and affectionate that Remus wondered how he'd ever mistaken it for anything other than love.
I know what I want because you gave me options. I know it hasn't been long, but it's never taken me too much time to know what I want from my life. I love our life. I love the farm. And I love your mum.
But you could have so much more,
Remus said.
You're so...
Yours.
Sirius completed.
I love you, and I don't want more than we have. All the more I want I can only have with you anyway. If you want me, then I'm yours to claim.
Remus groaned, and in that moment his knot deflated, slipping out of Sirius and letting all his spend seep out onto the seat. Sirius keened at the loss as Remus mentally calculated whether he'd be able to get the stain out himself or if he'd need to chance it with a professional cleaner.
Don't worry, love.
Remus crooned, putting that out of his mind. He slipped a hand between Sirius's legs and stopped the flow of cum from flooding out with his fingers.
I'll replace it all the moment we get home.
But Regulus,
Sirius gasped as Remus crooked his fingers in his sensitive hole. The pink in his cheeks had darkened, signaling the next wave of his heat coming fast as Remus fingered him.
Regulus can wait.
Remus growled.
We have business to take care of.
business.
Sirius whimpered, rutting and rolling his hips to look for friction against his fattening cock.
Well, I said I wasn't going to claim you in my truck.
Okay.
Sirius whimpered, bucking against the 3 fingers in his arse. Remus smiled, sucking on the scent gland that had the desperate aroused scent pouring from it once again.
I didn't say anything about similar restraint in our beds.
Sirius froze. He pulled away and his eyes fluttered open. He looked afraid to hope.
Really?
Remus nodded, leaning in to kiss him.
But first, you're going to come on my fingers one more time, okay, baby?
What was one more cum stain on his seat anyway? Chapter 2. Lily sat calmly at Hope's side, watching the other 2 alphas pace the living room with varying degrees of anxiety and impatience. She exchanged an amused look with Hope and registered the older women's wry expression at their aggravation, sipping her tea placidly as they waited for Remus to return with Sirius. It should have been more surprising when they got to the farm before the couple, but when Lily considered the scent pouring from Sirius when they'd left, and the starving expression on Remus's face when he'd smelled his omega in heat, she thought it was probably reasonable to expect they'd taken a brief detour to take the edge off. She just hoped it had been an intentional one, and her 2 friends weren't now fucking next to a car wreck.
If I know Remus,
Hope said softly, just for Lily to hear.
He's found a discreet place to take care of business, as it were.
Lily stifled a snort, amused that Hope had been thinking exactly the same thing as her, and gave the older woman a wink that made her cheeks grow pink with shared understanding.
They mostly try to keep their love-making.
Even as she tried to keep her voice low, Lily distantly heard Regulus retching where he was leaning against the windowsill, looking out to the driveway, and rolled her eyes.
Out of the house.
She told Lily.
They're very considerate of me, and there's so many little spots around the farm that they don't have to go too far.
Oh, yes.
Regulus interrupted, pushing off the sill with a huff.
So very considerate to keep guests waiting so you can engage in marital relations.
He wrinkled his nose and began to pace again. Even the other alpha, James, seemed to be observing Regulus in incredulity for his level of disgust and discomfort at the talk of natural and somewhat amusing biological functions. Not for the first time, she wondered at the family that Sirius had come to them from. If Regulus's discomfort was anything to judge by, the mating and heat cycles were not of common discussion where they came from. That seemed odd, but then she wasn't in the business of judging.
In my experience, omegas in heat are seldom conscious of social conventions and manners, I'm afraid, dear.
Hope gave bluntly. Lily hid her snigger behind her hand and exchanged a look with James, who, though also young, at least seemed more experienced than Regulus did. Marital relations indeed. Anything that Regulus was going to say to respond was cut off by the sound of wheels crunching over gravel, so not wrapped around a tree at least. She breathed a small sigh of relief that she immediately regretted. The smell of omega in heat preceded the couple by some margin, smelling like a full bakery, buttery and sweet and mouth-watering. She made eye contact with James again and saw him register the same, before deciding by unspoken consensus to breathe through their mouths as the door jiggled. Hope jumped to her feet to open it, and good thing, because a moment later, Remus strode through, carrying Sirius bridal style over the threshold. Regulus was on them in a second.
What have you done to him?
He whined almost childishly, craning his neck to see Sirius's face, currently buried in Remus's neck, and making to try and get Remus to let him down by pulling on the arm supporting him under the legs. He really had no idea what a mistake that was. Remus stood his ground and snarled, his eyes dark and threatening and possessive anger rolling off him in a wave that made even Hope shudder. For Lily's own part, the hair on her arms was standing on end, and one look at James told her he was also rooted to the spot. Regulus stumbled backward, shocked. The haze of aggression faded somewhat when the man in Remus's arms whimpered at the change in Remus's scent, and Remus turned inward, tutting gently and holding him closer. Some adjusting suddenly had Sirius holding Remus around the neck, with his legs hooked around his waist, with Remus supporting him under his bottom and between his shoulder blades, encouraging him to suckle at his neck and scent him for comfort. Remus looked at Lily pointedly.
I have to take care of Sirius.
He said in a tight, clipped voice.
Do you mind?
He looked meaningfully at Regulus, who, though now a respectful distance away, but was still in Remus's way, gawping and blocking his path to the bedroom.
Course, Rem.
She assured.
I'll just...
She made to come closer, and he nodded his consent, allowing her to go to Regulus and tug him out of the way. When Lily touched him, Regulus seemed to snap back to himself.
No, he said we'd talk when he got home.
He gave indignantly. Lily rolled her eyes.
Unless you want to watch your brother climb Remus like a tree right here in the living room, you're going to have to wait it out.
Lily hissed while manhandling him into the seat next to Hope and joining James in standing, feeling like a bouncer as Remus passed her on the way to the bedroom. After a few moments, she heard a door shut loudly, like it had been kicked closed. She shared a smirk with James.
What are we supposed to do in the meantime?
Reg whined again.
How long do they expect us to wait? An hour?
Again, Lily bit back a laugh. This boy really knew nothing at all.
Oh dear.
Hope tutted sympathetically, clearly thinking the same.
You should probably settle in for a few days at the shorter end of things.
Regulus reeled back in horror.
What?
Sirius heard the door shut behind Remus and finally looked up from his neck, no longer confused and scared by all the different alpha scents and Remus's unusual anger, but instead comforted by the quiet and the smell of all their things around him. He saw the bits of his nest littered around the floor and hummed happily as Remus placed him reverently onto the bed and knelt before him. His eyes moved carefully over him, assessing. Eventually he spoke.
How are you, baby?
Sirius dragged his eyes away from checking his nest to look into Remus's deep brown eyes. He felt himself relax a bit, doubly so when Remus put his hands on his thighs, rubbing gently against his jeans.
Okay for now.
He said a little shakily.
Feel sticky.
Shower
Remus asked.
before the next wave.
Sirius nodded, and Remus got to his feet, holding his hands out for Sirius to take. He took them, and Sirius let himself be pulled to standing and led to the ensuite, grateful not for the first time that Hope had insisted they take the bigger room when it became clear that Sirius was going to stay. They picked their way around the bits of Sirius's nest, and Remus closed and locked the door behind them, enveloping them in an even more complete quiet. He didn't bother getting undressed. He knew that Remus liked to do that part. When Remus turned to him, he just raised his arms expectantly, butterflies fluttering in his belly at the secret smile he got before Remus tugged his top off and threw it toward the hamper in the corner. He swooned harder when Remus ducked his head and kissed him unexpectedly, running his hands over Sirius's torso, making him shiver.
So your brother?
Remus said after a second, pulling away a little. Sirius sighed.
He's quite something, isn't he?
Sirius smiled sadly, feeling the guilt again at having slapped him, and that the whole reunion had been so poorly timed.
He's out of his mind with worry.
Sirius said with another sigh.
But he said some fucked up thing about me whoring myself out to you and...
He said what?
Sirius's knees wobbled and Remus caught him, apologizing softly about slipping into the alpha voice accidentally.
Sirius
said softly.
I know it seems possessive and dickish, but he's also been fucked up by my family. He doesn't understand that this could be something good, reciprocal and fun and loving.
Remus frowned a little, obviously skeptical, but clearly trying to understand.
The last he saw me, I was mad with heat, and he was pushing me out the door with his money so that I could escape the exploitation of my family.
Remus made an irritable huffing noise, hands returning to their work undressing Sirius.
I see where he's coming from then, but he needs to cool it a tad if we're going to be friends.
Sirius felt himself smiling as Remus worked his trousers off.
You'd want to be friends with him.
Remus looked up from his work with a small smile.
Let's talk about it later, when my hands aren't so close to your dick.
Sirius laughed at that, pressing closer.
Why? Do you have plans for it?
Remus grinned wolfishly. He let his hand drift south, cupping Sirius through his underwear. He gasped, pressing his forehead into Remus's shoulder as he chuckled.
Oh, baby.
He cooed, squeezing.
So pliant, huh?
Remus.
Sirius whined, feeling electricity pulse under his skin as the next wave of heat grew closer.
Need you.
What do you need from me, baby?
Remus asked, working Sirius's underwear off. Sirius stepped out of them and then dropped to his knees, nosing at Remus's crotch and the significant bulge hiding under the denim. He began to undo Remus's belt, mouth watering until Remus pulled him back to his feet. He whined in protest, but Remus was just smirking.
Shower first, love.
He said, eyes dark.
If I get my cock in you now, it's going to bring on the next wave, and I want you clean and comfortable first.
With that, he shucked his own trousers and pulled Sirius to the shower and proceeded to dote on him. He started by maneuvering him under the spray of hot water, letting the heat relax Sirius's shoulders and soothe the chafe from his slick-stained clothes. He picked up a loofah and saturated it with herby-smelling soap that Sirius had come to associate with their home, and guiding him to turn around, soaped up the back of his thighs and spine before moving up to his shoulders and chest. As he let himself be taken care of, Sirius began to feel his muscles relaxing and his thoughts unwinding from their spiral. Promises about being claimed notwithstanding, Sirius had never before felt this kind of care. He'd never been doted on or catered to in any way that might make him feel valued to this degree. He was never allowed to feel spoiled or valuable in any way. Only his function held any value, not who he was intrinsically as a person. It was easy, when he was in his head and feeling insecure, to take Remus's reluctance to mark him as a reason to doubt his devotion. But like this, with nothing between them but water and steam, with Remus prioritizing his comfort and safety, it was obvious just how much Remus cared for him. Remus was a good man. He'd taken Sirius in when he'd had no other options and brought him through his first heat with care and selfless concern. He'd given Sirius a home and a family and real friends and choices for the first time in his life. He'd given him the picture of a future that he could look forward to rather than dread. And when he thought of all that, with Remus's hands gentle on his burning skin and his breath sending goosebumps all over his body, it was easy to think of himself as already Remus's. It was possible to think of them as each other's, regardless of whether a biological bond had been established, because they'd chosen each other beyond what any hormonal claim could deliver. He sighed.
You all right, my love?
Remus asked, gently, all of the heat and the hunger bookmarked for this small moment of humanity and kindness. One of his hands was on Sirius's shoulder, having just rinsed the shampoo from his locks. He knew the conditioner came next.
You're just so good to me,
Sirius said in a small voice. He wasn't sure Remus had heard him until he finished applying the product, putting the conditioner to the side and turning him. Then he took him by the cheeks, tilting his head up. Remus's curls were wet and dripping, sending rivulets of water streaming down his chest, drawing Sirius's eyes down further, making him feel dizzy with love and desire.
You're worth more than good, love,
Remus said sweetly. He kissed Sirius's forehead before tipping it back under the spray, letting the water rinse out the conditioner. When Sirius pulled his head back, Remus settled his hands on Sirius's neck, stooping down slightly to meet his eye.
I want you to have everything you want in this world.
The effect of the care and consideration was that Sirius wanted nothing more than to return the favor, and with the heat simmering under his skin and making every touch twice as sensitive, there was only one way he could imagine reciprocating.
Right now,
He started swallowing thickly.
all I want is to taste your cock, Mooney.
Sirius breathed, positively desperate to the point of drooling every time the heavy length of Remus brushed his thigh as he moved. Remus smirked before he whispered conspiratorially. His eyes were dark.
And you always get what you want, don't you, sweethearts?
Sirius grinned and dropped to his knees again, and this time Remus didn't stop him. He nuzzled forward at Remus's half-hard cock, hanging heavily between his legs. His mouth watered as Remus petted at his hair, directing the shower of water away so Sirius didn't get a face full of spray.
One of these days,
Sirius murmured, taking his length in his hand and mouthing down the considerable length of it, and kissing between each word.
one of these days, I'm going to make good on every gift you've ever given me.
Baby, I don't need.
Remus began, but Sirius barreled on, encouraged by Remus's husky voice.
Gonna take your cum and give you so many babies.
Oh, fuck.
Remus groaned as Sirius licked up the silky length, sucking the tip into his mouth, loving the taste of him on his tongue.
Gonna give you such a beautiful life, Mooney.
Sirius gave sweetly, closing his eyes and picturing it, licking sloppily over his perfectly hard and throbbing length.
A perfect life in return for the perfect love you've given me.
Remus's hips jerked forward, almost as if he couldn't help it, like his entire being had tensed up, primed for action.
You want that, baby?
Remus asked gruffly, and Sirius shuddered as Remus's scent changed abruptly, shifting to deep and woody, like frankincense resin and cedarwood, rather than his usual sweet grass and hay. He looked up and noted the tendons in his arms taut and straining, his mouth open and gasping in the combination of their scents in the shower cubicle.
Remus,
You want me to breed you?
Sirius shuddered, and the cooling drops of water on his skin suddenly felt like they would evaporate into steam. He dimly registered that this was not Remus like he was used to. This was Remus dialed up by 1,000, radiating power and want and dangerous hunger in a way that Sirius had never seen before. In his hormonal state, it made him a little frightened, but only because of how much he wanted to see what this Remus would do, given the opportunity.
Mooney, are you?
In ruts.
Remus asked, already nodding, eyes glazed.
That's what you do to me, sweetheart.
He gave breathily.
You make me feral.
Everything in Sirius was telling him to submit to that look in Remus's eye that screamed.
You're mine.
Everything in him thrummed at those warm eyes, turned dark and hungry, and focused on him exclusively. He whimpered, clinging to Remus's wet thighs and feeling a gush of slick rush out of him, adding to the existing moisture puddles on the tiled floor underneath him. He just had time to see Remus's nostrils flare before he swayed forward, taking Remus's length with more enthusiasm, sucking him down, and moaning when Remus's fingers gathered his hair away from his face, a low growl emitting from his throat.
Want me to fuck your face, love?
He asked, low and gravelly.
Want me to fill you up?
Sirius moaned, harder and wetter than he'd ever been in his life, and nodding as he felt the head of Remus's cock hit the back of his throat, sucking hard.
I don't know how gentle I can be, sweetheart.
He said, a slight edge of desperation.
But if you want me to stop, I'm going to do my best, all right?
Sirius pulled off, Remus's cock falling from his mouth with a pop and a pant.
Don't need gentle moons.
He said, a whining edge to his tone.
I was made just for this.
Remus's responding groan was muffled by his fist stuffed into his mouth, and Sirius doubled his efforts, determined to get him to let go. Gripping Remus by his powerful thighs, he bobbed on and off his cock, sliding his tongue along the silky length on the intake and hollowing his cheeks on the retreat. When Remus's hips began to snap forward to meet his mouth, Sirius placed his hands behind his back and stuck his tongue out, blinking up at Remus with pleading eyes. With a snarl, Remus fulfilled his promise. His fist tightened in Sirius's hair and held him in place as he snapped his hips forward, making Sirius take him deeper than ever before. His eyes watered and each breath was shallower than the last, but internally he preened, happy to be useful, ecstatic that his alpha wanted him. With every thrust, he praised Sirius, calling him the sweetest little omega and complimenting how well he was doing, how good he took his cock. When Sirius took his own cock in hand and began to jerk it in time with Remus's thrusts, the pace picked up, like Remus was as turned on by Sirius's pleasure as he was by his own. All the while, Sirius struggled to keep his eyes open, entranced by the sight above him. Remus was magnificent, tall and lean, and staring down at Sirius like he was the best thing he'd ever seen, fucking into his mouth like it was the only hole there was, warm and wet and perfect, or at least that's what he was saying with each thrust. And Sirius had never had cause to doubt his word before, so he believed him, groaning around the thick heat of him in his mouth. Sirius grew close to coming again, licks of pleasure cresting to a peak that only accelerated when the base of Remus's cock also began to swell against his lips. Sirius was on the cusp of telling him to knot his mouth when Remus suddenly pulled him off bodily, yanking him up under the arms and pinning him to the cold shower wall, prompting a row of bottles to fall loudly to the floor.
You think I'm wasting my knot in your mouth when I can be inside you?
He gave gruffly, strained with the strength of his desperation. He nudged Sirius's legs apart without ceremony and without warning, slid home in a firm thrust that made Sirius see stars, crying out loudly when the knot lodged firmly inside him on the first stroke. He took a moment to be grateful that he was already loose and ready from their activities in the truck.
Fuck, baby.
Remus gasped brokenly as he ground his cock inside him. All it took for him to tip over the edge and fill him up was Sirius bucking his hips backwards, and then he felt and heard his orgasm. a low, loud groan that shook the foundations of the house as it pulsed within him, causing Sirius to come as well just from the pressure against his prostate.
Thank you, Alpha.
Sirius stammered, cheeks smushed against the tiles.
So good, so full.
He was so delirious. He had no idea of how long it took for the knot to deflate, too taken with Remus's muttering and kisses to the back of his neck, that when he pulled out, the gush of cum and slicked down his thighs was a surprise. He yelped, but otherwise had no time to be alarmed, because then Remus was wrapping him in a warm, fluffy towel and scooping him up again, carrying him to the bed.
Empty, Mooney.
Sirius sobbed, his heat well and truly crashing over him like a tidal wave.
Need you.
And you'll have me, baby.
Remus gave with promising determination, placing him on the bed and then kneeling again in an imitation to how this had all started, and opening the towel like he was a gift. The look on his face as he took in Sirius's naked form was enough to send a fresh flood of slick to soak the towel under him, and before he could close his legs, feeling exposed, Remus prized them apart gently again.
Oh, no, you don't, love.
He said gently, but with enough of an edge of that harsh hunger to make Sirius's hair stand on end. He leaned in until his nose was pressed to his neck, licking over his gland and nosing down to his collarbone. He sniffed as he went, following the scent he was looking for, until his nose was snuffling against Sirius's pubic hair and further down to where he could still feel the cum and slick dribbling out.
I said I'd get you clean and dry, didn't I?
Hope was just serving Regulus a cup of tea and a biscuit when the unmistakable sounds began. Up until that point, they could excuse the murmured voices and shuffling as normal, even if they probably were anything but innocent. But then there was the sound of something being knocked over, and they all looked up in alarm, and then there was the unmistakable sound of a loud moan. Regulus felt his eyes widen in horror as he recognized both his brothers and his brother's Alpha's voices mingled in the crude display. He looked at James, who had the audacity to look amused. He looked at Lily and found she was biting her lip against a smile as there was a sound like stumbling footsteps followed by a yelp and the unmistakable sound of begging. Lastly, he looked at Hope, who seemed totally unbothered by the debauched noises. He caught James's eye as the sound of rhythmic creaking and moaning became louder and more regular, and tried to communicate that he could not sit through this. James coughed to cover his laugh and cleared his throat.
Hope,
he said, breaking their silence.
could we, do you mind if we look around the farm?
She looked up at the Alpha, blinking a little as she seemed to realize what the problem was. She chuckled.
Lily can show you the barn if you'd like.
She said, looking questioningly at the redhead who nodded.
If you like, there are some horses that need feeding and some sheep that need moving across pastures.
Regulus balked. Sirius moaned as Remus buried his face between his cheeks, sucking and licking the combination of them still oozing from his hole.
Yes, Mooney, fuck.
Sirius yelled, uncaring of who could hear, only concerned with the feeling of Remus's tongue delving deep inside of him, cleaning him out and sending little shockwaves of pleasure throughout his body. Remus hummed, but it was more of a growl of satisfaction as his strong arm held him down on the mattress across the hips, preventing him from squirming away or arching up. He added a finger into the equation and worked it against Sirius's prostate, the sound becoming wet and obscene with every crook of his finger and slurp of his mouth. Sirius was delirious. Remus was working him open with his fingers and tongue, slurping everything he had to give, and it was the hottest thing that Sirius could imagine. It didn't take long for him to come again after that. The unrelenting pressure from Remus's fingers and tongue in his hole and the grip of his free hand on Sirius's cock, stroking firmly, quickly sent him over, but it wasn't enough even then. Even as Remus' finger fucked him through his orgasm and licked his way up from his opening, over his balls and up his still hard and leaking length to clean up his spend, Sirius still craved more. He was still so empty. As if to prove as much, his stomach clenched painfully as Remus bit down on a nipple and he keened, back arching from the mattress as he felt Remus's cock hot and hard against his hip and so far away from where he wanted it. His hips bucked up involuntarily to meet it, but Remus's pelvis was too far away even as his mouth continued his assault on his sensitive chest.
Remus, 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 Remus.
He begged, eyes rolling back into his head at the continued attention on his oh-so-tender nipples. It sent a clenching pang through his being with every twist and pinch to them, like there was a tether tied from his nipples to his cock, and the place within that felt like a gaping hole, so ready to be filled, so needing. The sensation was continuous, nibbling and the sucking and the laving of Remus's tongue over the sensitive nubs, persistent, almost as if he expected something to come out for his efforts. That thought made him clench on nothing again, keening loudly.
Please, Alpha.
Remus finally brought his face up to be level with Sirius's, bracketing his head and grinning knowingly with the lower part of his face still shiny with slick.
One day,
He said, bringing a hand up to massage his pec muscles and flicking the nipples in turn.
one day you're going to keep our babies fed with these.
He pinched Sirius's nipple, making him squirm before dropping his head to kiss it softly.
But for now, they're all for me, huh?
It was altogether too much. He was sensitive at every point that Remus was touching him, everything within him burning with desperation to be filled, to be closer, to be devoured. And Remus's words weren't helping. Sirius was being ratcheted up to a fever point where he was past even begging. He was hysterical with need, feeling it fill his eyes and drip down his cheeks before he felt a warm tongue lapping them from his cheeks, tasting his tears.
What is it, love?
Remus asked, infuriatingly soft but with dark, hungry eyes.
Tell me what you need.
I'm so empty, Moons.
Sirius sobbed, trying and failing to grab Remus by the cock and line it up where he wanted it.
Need you inside me, filling me to the brim.
You sure, sweetheart?
Remus asked, chasing Sirius's lips and biting on his jaw, sucking marks as he went.
You really want my babies?
Yes, Mooney.
Sirius begged.
Need to be yours. Need to be bred.
Well,
Remus said with a toothy grin.
who am I to deny my little Omega when he asks so nicely?
He pulled away slightly and told Sirius to stick his tongue out. He did, and Remus spat on his tongue before licking into his mouth, kissing and collecting his saliva just to spit it back into his mouth. Then he was gone, and Sirius was about to cry out, bereft and confused before Remus was lifting him again to straddle his lap, positioning them on the bed against the pillows. He held his hand out and Sirius understood. He nodded and let his tongue hang out, drooling the mess of their combined spit onto Remus's hand and watching him use it to lube himself up even more. And then, finally, Sirius was being guided onto Remus's beautiful, thick cock, gasping at the penetration even though they had done this multiple times that day. When he bottomed out, the sound slick and wet, Sirius screamed. Remus was shuddering with the effort it took to hold off and wait for Sirius to adjust to the perfect fullness again. And when Sirius began to move, rocking as if in a trance with his eyes fixed on Remus, debauched and red-cheeked as he gazed through his eyelashes at him, he heard the guttural groan of his alpha, finding his own pleasure at last. It was addictive. It was too much. It was everything he'd ever wanted and needed. His eyes slipped closed as he felt Remus thrusting up into him, planting his knees on the mattress to hold himself still for Remus to fuck into him, chasing his pleasure in Sirius, filling him up so perfectly, completing the puzzle that was them at last. Then Remus gripped him by the arse and pulled him down to meet each thrust, and Sirius thought he might die from the depth of it, plunging so deep he swore he could taste it. The feeling of teeth on his neck pulled him from the fullness inside him, and he suddenly remembered the promise he'd been made in the car. Clearly Remus hadn't forgotten. His heart rate spiked.
Mooney.
He whined, breath coming faster and toes curling in anticipation of his teeth, currently bared against his neck, as he continually thrust and ground inside him as the base of his cock began to swell again, catching on his rim.
Baby, are you?
The effort showing in Remus's tone reminded Sirius that for all they were engaging in a ritual as old as time itself, that they were still themselves. This was still Remus, checking one last time to make sure Sirius was sure, and he was still himself, desperate to be Remus's in any way he could. Reassured and full of so much love he thought he might burst, he nodded, pressing Remus's head closer.
Do it, Remus.
Sirius begged, fingers threading with his curls.
Make me yours.
Remus apparently didn't need to be told twice. His hands a moment ago, bearing down on Sirius's waist to thrust upward into him, took him by the chin, never pausing the movement of his hips, and tenderly tilted it to the side, steadying him as he bit down hard over Sirius's scent gland. Sirius's vision went white. He was aware that he was coming again before it all went dark as he sunk, ecstatic, into oblivion. Sirius looked at his reflection in the mirror over the dresser, pushing his hair further back over his shoulder to get a better look at the bite sitting proud over his gland, red and swollen, and marking him forever as Remus's. It sent a giddy feeling into his belly at the sight, and he couldn't help the smile that overtook his features as he noted the red indents of each tooth that had penetrated his skin and completed the bond. They'd both come harder than they had in either of their lives when they'd felt it complete, and Sirius had passed out almost immediately from pure overstimulation, his last memory the pulse of Remus's seed inside him, filling him all the way up. When he'd woken up, it was to find it was the next day and he was sticky and hot, pressed into Remus's chest, flung over him as if they'd simply slumped down from their sitting position to lying down following their mutual climaxes. Remus, he could see, was still passed out, visible in the reflection of the mirror, with his face smushed into the pillow he was hugging in lieu of Sirius, snoring softly. His heat was pretty much over now, but he could still feel the bond pulsing away under his skin, tying him to Remus in a way that defied description and made him feel slightly unhinged with the desire to be closer, to touch him. Even as he felt the remains of the heat receding, he could feel the fizzing awareness that his alpha was near, and the sense of well-being in knowing Remus was satisfied and taken care of was profound. He was bone-tired and raw from fucking, but pleased beyond measure, proud as anything that he'd won this man over, that this man had found him worthy of being his mate for the rest of their natural lives. He'd need a day or so to recover, but he had no recollection of feeling this energized after the rest of his heat so far. So far the bond was a net win. Remus stirred, and Sirius turned toward him. He watched as Remus reached for the other side of the bed, where Sirius usually slept, and then looked around in confusion until he located him, standing and watching as he searched.
What day is it?
Remus croaked. Sirius chuckled, drawn ever closer by the warm, fuzzy softness that was Remus when he'd just woken up.
I really don't know,
he said softly. He walked over to the bed as Remus watched him, looping an arm around him when he was close enough and tugging him until he was lying next to him. Remus buried his face in Sirius's neck, snuffling and scenting over the fresh mark with a scent of pride and contentment that made him want to melt. For a while they lay like that, scenting and kissing and humming happily until Sirius remembered Regulus.
What are the chances my brother got bored of waiting for us and just left?
He asked, not knowing which he hoped was the case, but not wanting to leave their perfect bubble either.
He's still here.
Remus said simply, smiling dopily as he surfaced from Sirius's skin.
How do you know?
Sirius asked. Remus shrugged, still looking a little dazed.
I can smell his worry.
Slick drunk. That's how Sirius would describe that look. Remus looked almost drugged with happiness, and Sirius really wasn't complaining. He felt the same, cock and not drunk, and maybe also a little intoxicated by love. He pressed closer and nipped at the tendon of Remus's neck. He felt fingers delicately tracing over his mark and shivered.
I can feel it.
Remus said in wonder.
I always thought people were exaggerating when they said that the bond was like this, but
It's like you're in my blood now.
Sirius finished dreamily.
It's like we merged or something. I'm yours now.
and I'm yours too.
Remus said, smiling in delirious happiness.
I love you.
I love you, Sirius.
Remus said, looking pretty overwhelmed himself to have found themselves there. They kissed, and it was like every moment not kissing, touching, or scenting from there on out was the interruption, not the other way around. It was like this was their default now. Only the inconveniences of life, like eating and sleep and chores, could stop them from just this, searching for more of the essence of the other in the dance of their tongues and the trace of fingertips over sensitive, bruised, and in Remus's case, scratched, bloody skin. Speaking of inconveniences, however, the light tapping against the bedroom door disturbed any further opportunity to explore their new default setting. Remus tensed and sniffed, and then relaxed again.
It's Mum.
He said softly, pulling away from Sirius's chasing lips and clearing his throat.
Everything okay, Ma?
He asked.
I've made breakfast if you're ready to come down.
Came the tentative question through the wood of the door. Sirius immediately recognized the offer for what it was, an invitation to face the music. He suddenly felt anxiety spiking through him until Remus's hand was combing through his hair, soothing him. His brown eyes were uncertain and maybe a little possessive as well as he looked back. Sirius started, trying not to let his voice shake.
Should we go down?
The hand in his hair tightened a fraction and then relaxed, but it looked like it took effort. Remus looked over his expression carefully.
We don't have to do anything, baby.
But you said Reg was still worried.
Remus nodded, but he didn't look altogether too concerned, his eyes still steady on Sirius as he resumed his petting.
He is, but that other alpha is still with him. I think they slept in the barn, and Lily is here too.
Christ, you can smell all that.
Remus nodded with a wince.
I think I'm hyper-aware of potential threats right now.
Sirius nodded, thinking of his anxiety and pressing closer to scent Remus some more.
Me too, but I don't think Reg will hurt me, do you?
Remus hummed thoughtfully as he rested his hand on the back of Sirius's neck. Reluctantly, it seemed, he finally shook his head and Sirius looked up at him.
No, I think you're safe with him.
He admitted.
But if he does anything you don't like, baby,
He said, a fierce protective edge entering his voice.
I will act as I see fit.
Sirius's anxiety abated somewhat, and he let himself kiss Remus one last time, girding himself to get out of bed and face his brother. Remus had thought a lot about what he would like the aftermath of claiming Sirius to look like, and strangely none of those fantasies looked like what they were dealing with that morning. He'd hoped for a quiet day of talking and touching and time to enjoy it for themselves, but instead they were forced into the shower and down the stairs to face the real world, far too early for his liking. They made their way down the stairs hand in hand, Sirius tucked slightly behind him with uncharacteristic shyness, until they found themselves in the kitchen facing their respective family members. And Remus wasn't an idiot. He knew that they'd been loud, even if Sirius's heat and his rut had been strangely short, probably to do with the claiming bond. There was no doubt as to what they had been up to, and neither of their appearances helped matters. They had cleaned up, but he knew his neck was covered in purple bruises, and Sirius was still pink-cheeked and glassy-eyed as the last of the heat receded. That was before you factored in the way he knew their scents had mingled, announcing their union better than anything else could. He could see it in the way James and Lily responded to their entry, and the way his mother beamed when they entered the kitchen. Lily looked on too, wry and impressed, and Remus couldn't bring himself to feel embarrassed over any of it. Only Regulus looked confused by it all. Remus decided to give him the benefit of the doubt and keep his own defensiveness in check, to let Sirius lead the interaction. That was if he ever came out from behind Remus's trouser legs.
Sweetheart,
He coaxed, tugging him forward.
Mum made pancakes. Look.
It was a bribe, but it was a good one at least. Sirius could always be relied upon to perk up when syrupy pancakes were on offer. Predictably, Sirius stuck his head out and began to move toward the table, clearly hungry, before a gasp went up from across the table, prompting Sirius to freeze in place. Remus looked up and noted Regulus staring in horror at Sirius's neck, the bite proudly on display with his hair scraped back in a messy bun. Despite the instinct to scoop Sirius and the pancakes up and retreat back to safety, Remus stayed in place, resisting the urge and determined to see how his mate would handle it. While the brothers stared at each other, the room didn't breathe. Everyone seemed to be waiting to see if the interaction would resolve in a happy reunion or disaster, and distantly Remus wondered if Regulus felt, in some backward patriarchal sense, that Remus should have asked his permission. He snorted lightly at the very thought, and it seemed to break some of the tension in the room. He still couldn't help the hand he placed on Sirius's lower back, just reassuring him, as his scent became sharp and sticky with anxiety. He seemed to gather himself and broke the silence at last.
Did you have something you wanted to say to me, Regulus?
Regulus was quite obviously taken aback by the question, as if he'd expected some defense or argument right off the bat.
He bit you.
Regulus turned his incredulous gaze onto Remus, who only narrowly avoided growling and warning. It was still a near thing.
We're mated.
Sirius corrected coolly. He leaned back into Remus's touch, sticking his chin out defiantly as he took his hand. Regulus seemed perfectly befuddled by this. He looked between all the other room occupants, as if searching for an ally. The closest he found was in James, who at least looked sympathetic, coming to his side with a gentle hand to his shoulder.
Reg,
He said with a carefully soft tone.
remember what we talked about. Let him speak.
Reg seemed to war with himself for a moment, but ultimately deflated slightly. He looked at Sirius, pleading suddenly in his eyes.
Are you happy?
He asked.
You don't.
Regret it.
Sirius finished. Regulus nodded, and Remus held his breath.
I could no sooner regret being claimed by Remus than I could regret being your brother.
Remus watched that land with Regulus like a blow to the solar plexus.
I just want you safe, Siri.
Reg said in a smaller voice than before.
I'm sorry I made assumptions. I'm sorry I called you a whore. I just want you to be free to make your own decisions.
It didn't feel like that.
Sirius gave shakily. His hand shook in Remus's, and he squeezed it reassuringly.
Yesterday it felt like you expected to be able to make my decisions for me.
Reg nodded, expression genuinely apologetic.
I didn't expect to find you in a place like this.
He said softly, looking around Hope's kitchen with an expression like sad longing.
I didn't expect to find you
Loved and looked after and happy.
Sirius asked, squeezing Remus's hand back. Remus raised their joined fingers to his lips and kissed them affectionately. Sirius looked at him gratefully. Reg shrugged when they looked back.
That was always my job.
He said simply. Then he looked to Remus and back to Sirius.
I was always the one you came to when you needed help, and I to you.
He finally looked at Remus steadily.
But you seem to be doing a wonderful job of it as well.
Just like that, the dam broke. Sirius broke apart from Remus and hurried over to his brother, smothering him in an embrace that almost took him off his feet. After a moment of alarm, Reg softened and returned the hug, carefully avoiding the raw mark on Sirius's neck. Later they would talk properly, and Regulus would apologize to Remus, and Remus would forgive him, because it made Sirius so happy to hear it. He'd be ribbed to shit by Lily, and as Sirius tentatively reacquainted himself with his childhood best friend, James, the other alpha, and he'd be congratulated by his mother, who'd tell him, mortifyingly, that she'd already began knitting booties and baby hats for their future family. The day would pass in a haze of exhausted bliss, with Sirius glued to his side and the people they loved most in close proximity, and the only thing that could beat it was the knowledge that now there would be much more of these sorts of days going forward, as well as plenty of time to be alone together. And then he could grudgingly admit that as much as he wanted Sirius to himself, that this was pretty good too. Finite. Thanks for listening to this text-to-speech podfic, composed by Burning Aurora, Caliana, and Flowerhawk.